Eastern Front, summer 1944. The 28th Guards Rifle Division pushed westward, the morning mist still clinging to the low-lying fields, a deceptive veil over what seemed to be an empty landscape. After weeks of relentless advance, the rhythm of the offensive had become a kind of grim certainty, and the absence of immediate resistance fostered a dangerous confidence among the forward elements. This perceived vacuum, however, held the potential for catastrophic surprise, a sudden shift from hunter to hunted that could unravel the entire spearhead. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov, commander of the 3rd Platoon, 7th Company, scanned the tree line ahead through his binoculars, the lenses still cool from the pre-dawn air. His training emphasized caution, a deep-seated suspicion of quiet sectors, yet the reports from the scout teams ahead spoke only of abandoned farmsteads and churned earth. No recent enemy presence. His men, a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh replacements, moved with a practiced gait, their rifles slung, eyes mostly on the uneven ground. The platoon had covered nearly 5 kilometers since first light, maintaining a steady pace of 4 kilometers per hour. Their objective, a small crossroads marked on Volkov's worn map as point 112, lay just beyond the next stand of pines, a dense, dark mass against the brightening sky. Radio traffic remained minimal, mostly routine checks from company headquarters, confirming the general lack of contact across their sector. This quietude, while superficially reassuring, often preceded the most violent engagements. Volkov considered the terrain, open fields, recently harvested, offering little cover, bordered by those thick belts of trees. Standard doctrine dictated a wide flanking maneuver around such potential ambush points. But the pressure to maintain momentum, to exploit the perceived German disarray, often overrode textbook prudence. The division's orders were clear: advance rapidly, secure key positions, and prevent the enemy from establishing a coherent defensive line. His lead squad, under Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, was perhaps 300 meters ahead, their figures growing smaller as they neared the tree line. Petrov, a stocky man from the Urals, had a reputation for aggressive scouting, sometimes bordering on recklessness, but his instincts were usually sharp. Volkov watched him briefly halt his squad, signaling for 2 men to move forward cautiously, their carbines held ready. The silence of the morning, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery from another sector, felt unusually heavy. The ground underfoot was soft, a mix of damp soil and stubble, making for relatively quiet movement. The platoon's progress had been unimpeded by mines or booby traps, a further reinforcement of the belief that the Germans had pulled back in disarray. This assumption, built on a string of easy victories, was a fragile foundation for the next few minutes. The tree line, seemingly innocuous, remained a dark, impenetrable wall, offering no visual clues to its interior. The leading elements of the 12th Guards Rifle Division, having pushed through the shattered remnants of the German forward screen, found themselves abruptly confronted by an entirely new and unforeseen obstacle. The exhilaration of the breakthrough, fueled by the sight of retreating enemy infantry and abandoned equipment, evaporated instantly as the 1st Panther tank emerged from the dense tree line bordering the eastern edge of the field. Its long 7.5-centimeter KWK-42 L-70 gun, a menacing silhouette against the overcast sky, traversed slowly, locking onto the advancing Soviet T-34s. The initial engagement was brutal and swift. Unit damage reports from the 3rd Tank Army indicate that within a 15-minute period, 4 T-34-76 tanks of the 12th Guards Tank Brigade were struck and disabled by rounds from these new German vehicles, all at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters. The Panthers, operating with a tactical discipline that belied their sudden appearance, maintained their positions at the tree line, utilizing the natural cover to maximum effect, while their superior optics and main armament allowed them to engage with impunity. Their 80mm frontal glacis plate, angled at 55 degrees, proved impervious to the standard 76mm rounds fired by the Soviet tanks at these distances. Infantry, having fanned out across the open ground in anticipation of consolidating their gains, found themselves caught in the open. The Panthers, after neutralizing the immediate tank threat, shifted their fire to the exposed riflemen, their coaxial MG-34 machine guns sweeping through the ranks. Interrogation files from captured German tankers later revealed that their orders were explicit. Establish a blocking position and inflict maximum casualties to buy time for the main defensive line to solidify. The psychological impact on the Soviet infantry was profound. The belief that the field was clear had been shattered by an enemy they had not anticipated. The Soviet command, receiving urgent reports of the new, formidable German tanks, immediately ordered a halt to the advance. Reconnaissance flights, hastily dispatched, confirmed the presence of at least a company of Panther tanks, dug in and camouflaged along the tree line. The operational directive, "Do not engage unless absolutely necessary, await specialized anti-tank assets," was relayed down the chain of command, bringing the momentum of the entire offensive sector to a grinding standstill. The immediate strategic implication was a loss of initiative, transforming a fluid breakthrough into a static confrontation, a situation the Soviet High Command had desperately sought to avoid. The unexpected appearance of these heavy tanks, previously encountered only in limited numbers on other sectors of the front, forced a rapid reevaluation of the tactical situation. The 12th Guards Rifle Division, which had been poised to exploit a significant gap in the German lines, was now pinned down, its forward elements taking sporadic but effective fire. The open terrain, which had just moments before seemed an advantage, had become a killing ground, dominated by the long-range precision of the Panther's main gun. The initial encounters, stark and brutal, compelled a rapid reevaluation within Soviet command structures. Reports from shattered forward units, often relayed by the few survivors, painted a consistent picture of an armored adversary possessing unprecedented frontal resilience and a main gun of devastating power. The sheer finality of these engagements, where entire platoons could be annihilated without apparent damage to the opposing force, demanded immediate analytical attention. Field intelligence summaries, compiled from these raw combat accounts, began to coalesce around a distinct profile. The enemy tank, designated as the Panther or sometimes the PZ-KPFW-V, was described as having a sloped front glacis, a feature immediately noted for its shot-deflecting properties. Its long-barreled 7.5-centimeter KWK-42 L-70 gun was repeatedly cited as capable of penetrating the frontal armor of T-34s and KV-1s at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, often with a single hit. Interrogation files of captured German tank crewmen, though initially scarce, provided corroborating details on the Panther's specifications. These accounts, cross-referenced with battlefield wreckage analysis, confirmed the 80mm thick, 55-degree sloped frontal armor plate. The gun's muzzle velocity, estimated at over 900 meters per second, explained the observed penetration capabilities against Soviet armor, which typically relied on a balance of armor thickness and mobility. Soviet armor doctrine, honed against earlier German panzers, emphasized maneuver and overwhelming numbers, often in conjunction with anti-tank artillery. The Panther, however, presented a challenge that undermined both pillars. Its speed and cross-country performance, while not superior to the T-34, allowed it to maintain tactical flexibility, and its gun negated the numerical advantage of Soviet tanks in direct frontal engagements. The immediate operational impact was a shift in engagement tactics. Tank commanders were instructed to avoid direct frontal assaults against Panthers whenever possible, instead seeking flank or rear shots. Infantry anti-tank teams, previously effective with PTRD and PTRS anti-tank rifles against earlier German tanks, found their weapons almost useless against the Panther's main armor, relegating them to targeting tracks or optical sights. Artillery observation reports detailed the limited effectiveness of standard 76mm divisional guns against the Panther's frontal aspect. Even the more powerful 85mm anti-aircraft guns, repurposed for anti-tank roles, struggled at longer ranges. This necessitated a closer engagement distance, increasing the risk to the gun crews and reducing their survivability in open terrain. The psychological effect on the infantry was palpable. The Panther became a symbol of an almost invincible foe, capable of absorbing direct hits that would cripple other tanks. The sight of a Panther emerging from cover, its long gun traversing, often triggered an immediate instinct for cover, fundamentally altering the dynamics of the battlefield. This new threat spurred an urgent demand for more potent anti-tank weaponry. Design bureaus were tasked with accelerating the development of heavier anti-tank guns and improved tank designs. The 100mm BS-3 field gun and the 122mm A-19 gun, already in various stages of development, received renewed priority, their potential against the Panther becoming a critical factor in their deployment. The tactical implications extended beyond direct engagement. Panther units were observed to spearhead German counterattacks, exploiting their superior firepower to break Soviet lines, with accompanying infantry consolidating the gains. This forced Soviet commanders to allocate disproportionate resources to counter these armored thrusts, often at the expense of offensive momentum. The experience of the infantry, facing an enemy that could not be stopped by conventional means, began to reshape their understanding of the battlefield. The open field, once a domain for maneuver and massed assault, now held a new, lethal uncertainty. A forward observer, Lieutenant Anatoly Novikov, pressed his field glasses against his brow, the lenses smudged with morning dew. His report, scribbled onto a damp page from his notebook, detailed the precise coordinates of the Panther's emergence: 54.872 N, 37.618 E, approximately 800 meters from the leading elements of the 107th Rifle Division. The sudden appearance of the armored column, previously undetected by aerial reconnaissance or partisan intelligence, represented a critical breach in the division's defensive posture, threatening to unravel the entire advance on the central sector. The initial Soviet response was immediate but uncoordinated. A company of T-34-76 tanks, positioned in hull-down emplacements along a low ridge, opened fire. Their 76.2mm F-34 main guns, designed to engage the earlier Panzer III and IV models, proved largely ineffectual against the Panther's glacis plate. Damage reports from the engagement, compiled later from surviving tank crews, indicated that over 70% of the rounds fired at ranges exceeding 500 meters either ricocheted harmlessly or failed to achieve penetration. Infantry anti-tank teams, equipped with PTRD-41 anti-tank rifles, attempted to maneuver into flanking positions. The PTRD, a single-shot, bolt-action weapon firing a 14.5mm round, possessed a theoretical penetration capability of 35 to 40 millimeters of armor at 100 meters. However, the Panther's side armor, while thinner than its front, still measured 40 to 50 millimeters, often angled to enhance protection. The rapid advance of the German tanks, coupled with suppressive machine gun fire, made closing to effective range a suicidal proposition. A platoon of engineers, tasked with laying anti-tank mines, found themselves caught in the open. Their TM-35 anti-tank mines, designed to be pressure detonated by vehicle tracks, required careful placement and concealment. The speed of the Panther advance, estimated by surviving infantry to be between 15 to 20 kilometers per hour across the open ground, negated any opportunity for effective deployment. The engineers, their shovels and mines useless against the onrushing steel, were forced to scatter, many cut down by coaxial machine gun fire. The divisional artillery, primarily 76mm ZIS-3 field guns, began to register targets. These versatile guns, often employed in a direct-fire anti-tank role, were positioned further to the rear, their crews relying on forward observers for targeting information. The initial ranging shots fell wide, impacting several hundred meters beyond the lead Panthers. The time delay between observation, relay, and firing solution, typically 2 to 3 minutes, allowed the German tanks to continue their advance, their momentum unchecked. The sheer psychological impact of the Panthers' appearance was profound. Soviet infantry, accustomed to engaging lighter German armor, suddenly faced a vehicle that seemed impervious to their standard anti-tank weaponry. The long 7.5-centimeter KWK-42L70 gun, capable of piercing the T-34's frontal armor at over 1,000 meters, outranged most Soviet anti-tank assets. This disparity in capabilities created a palpable sense of vulnerability, undermining the confidence built during the initial phases of the offensive. The engagement quickly devolved into a series of desperate, localized actions rather than a coordinated defense. Small groups of riflemen, armed with grenades and Molotov cocktails, attempted to close with the tanks, a tactic born of desperation rather than strategic efficacy. Their efforts, often resulting in heavy casualties, highlighted the critical deficiency in immediate, effective anti-tank countermeasures at the infantry level. The field, once perceived as a clear path, had become a killing ground. The initial reports filtering back from the forward observation posts, then from the shattered remnants of the 124th Rifle Division, spoke in stark terms of an enemy armored vehicle unlike any encountered before. Damage assessments from the first engagements, meticulously compiled from recovered wreckage and survivor testimony, indicated a frontal armor thickness consistently exceeding 80 millimeters, often reaching 100 millimeters at critical points like the glacis plate. This rendered the standard 45mm anti-tank gun, the ubiquitous M1937, virtually useless, its shells deflecting or simply shattering against the sloped steel. Even the more powerful 76mm ZIS-3 divisional gun, the backbone of Soviet anti-tank defense, struggled to achieve reliable penetration from frontal arcs beyond 500 meters. Interrogation files from captured German crewmen, often embellished but containing kernels of truth, began to paint a picture of a new generation of tank, one designed to withstand the very weapons that had previously proven so effective against the Panzer III and IV. The sheer mass of the Panther, its 45-ton combat weight, contributed to its formidable presence, a physical manifestation of its defensive capabilities. The long-barreled 7.5-centimeter KWK-42L70 cannon mounted on these Panthers possessed a muzzle velocity approaching 935 meters per second, a devastating improvement over previous German tank guns. This velocity translated into a flat trajectory and exceptional accuracy, allowing Panthers to engage Soviet T-34s and KV-1s at ranges where the Soviet tanks could not effectively reply. Artillery observation logs frequently noted the rapid and precise destruction of Soviet armor formations, often before the Soviet tanks could even close to their own optimal engagement distances. The tactical implications of this new threat were profound and immediate. Soviet infantry, previously trained and equipped to counter the lighter German armor, found themselves in a terrifyingly exposed position. Their primary anti-tank assets were rendered obsolete, leaving them reliant on increasingly desperate and costly close-quarters tactics, such as anti-tank grenades and Molotov cocktails, which required immense bravery and often resulted in heavy casualties. The psychological impact of facing an enemy tank that shrugged off direct hits from standard anti-tank guns was immense, eroding morale and fostering a sense of helplessness. The realization settled in across the front lines. The battlefield had fundamentally changed, and the existing Soviet doctrine for countering German armor was no longer sufficient. The appearance of the Panther was not merely an incremental improvement. It was a qualitative leap in armored warfare, demanding an entirely new approach to infantry-tank cooperation and anti-tank defense. The fields that had once seemed clear now held the potential for sudden, overwhelming destruction. The initial shock of the Panthers' appearance had, by early 1944, given way to a grim determination within Soviet command. The Stavka, receiving a steady stream of damage reports and frontline assessments, understood that a purely reactive defense was unsustainable. A new doctrine was urgently required, one that acknowledged the Panther's formidable capabilities while exploiting its inherent limitations. This shift in thinking began at the regimental level, where officers and commissars, witnessing the tank's destructive power firsthand, started to codify ad hoc solutions into formal training. Soviet infantry, initially trained to engage German armor with anti-tank rifles and Molotov cocktails, found these methods largely ineffectual against the Panther's frontal glacis. The PTRD-41 and PTRS-41 anti-tank rifles, once capable of penetrating the side armor of earlier Panzer IVs, could only hope to damage the Panther's tracks or optics at close range. Molotov cocktails, while still a psychological weapon, rarely achieved a meaningful kill against the new tank's sealed engine compartment. The tactical imperative became clear: avoid frontal engagements and seek vulnerable flanks or the rear. The deployment of dedicated anti-tank companies within infantry regiments increased dramatically. These units, often equipped with the 45mm M1942 anti-tank gun and later the 57mm ZS2, were now positioned to create kill zones rather than simply provide fire support. Interrogation files from captured German tankers frequently mentioned a sudden, overwhelming concentration of anti-tank fire from concealed positions. The 45mm gun, while still struggling against the Panther's frontal armor, could penetrate its side at ranges under 300 meters. The ZS2, with its high-velocity round, offered a more reliable solution, capable of piercing the Panther's side armor at over 800 meters. Beyond direct fire, Soviet engineers began to emphasize mine warfare on an unprecedented scale. Production logs show a significant increase in anti-tank mine output, particularly the TM41 and TM44 models, which used a pressure plate to detonate a 5.5 kilogram charge of TNT. These mines were laid in dense fields, often disguised with local vegetation, along expected avenues of Panther advance. Unit diaries frequently record the demoralizing effect these unseen weapons had on German tank crews, forcing them to proceed with extreme caution or risk immobilization. The development of specialized anti-tank assault groups also became a cornerstone of the new doctrine. These groups, typically comprising 5 to 7 infantrymen, were armed with a mix of anti-tank grenades, satchel charges, and submachine guns. Their training focused on close-quarters combat with tanks, emphasizing speed, stealth, and coordinated attacks. A common tactic involved 1 or 2 men drawing the tank's attention with small arms fire, while others maneuvered to the flanks or rear to deploy charges against the engine deck or tracks. This required immense courage and discipline, transforming individual soldiers into highly effective tank hunters. The deployment of these assault groups was often synchronized with artillery barrages or air support, designed to suppress accompanying German infantry and isolate the Panthers. Air reconnaissance reports from the 1st Air Army frequently detailed the successful targeting of Panther formations, often guided by ground observers from these very infantry units. The combination of mines, concentrated anti-tank gunfire, and aggressive infantry assaults began to erode the Panthers' perceived invincibility. The tactical landscape was slowly, painstakingly being reshaped by adaptation and a willingness to confront the new threat with evolving methods. Kursk, July 1943. The Soviet infantry, having endured the initial German armored thrusts, found themselves in a new and terrifying engagement. Their previous encounters with Panzer III and IV tanks, while costly, had established a grim but understandable rhythm of combat. The arrival of the Panther, however, shifted the calculus of battlefield survival, demanding a rapid and often brutal reevaluation of tactics. The 76.2mm ZIS-3 divisional gun, the backbone of Soviet anti-tank defense, possessed a muzzle velocity of 680 meters per second when firing its standard armor-piercing round. Against the frontal glacis of a Panther, sloped at 55 degrees and 80 millimeters thick, this round often shattered or ricocheted harmlessly, even at close ranges. Field reports from the 5th Guards Tank Army noted numerous instances where Panther tanks absorbed direct hits from ZIS-3s without apparent damage, continuing their advance with impunity. This technological disparity forced Soviet infantry to confront a new reality. Their anti-tank rifles, the PTRD-41 and PTRS-41, firing 14.5mm rounds, were entirely ineffective against the Panther's frontal or side armor, even at point-blank range. Interrogation files of captured German tank crews often contained accounts of Soviet anti-tank riflemen continuing to fire at their tanks, a desperate and ultimately futile gesture that underscored the infantry's lack of effective weaponry. The primary infantry anti-tank weapon, the RPG-43 anti-tank grenade, required a direct hit from above or from the rear to inflict critical damage, a maneuver that demanded extreme bravery and often resulted in heavy casualties for the attacking soldier. Unit diaries from the 6th Guards Army recorded a noticeable increase in close-quarters combat engagements against Panthers, as infantry attempted to bypass the formidable frontal armor. The sheer psychological impact of facing an armored vehicle that seemed impervious to their standard weapons was profound. The Panther's 7.5cm KWK-42 L-70 gun, with its high velocity and accurate fire, could engage Soviet positions from ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, well beyond the effective range of most infantry weapons. This forced the infantry to dig deeper, to rely more heavily on camouflage and concealment, and to accept a higher risk of being suppressed or destroyed before they could even attempt to engage. The tactical implication was a shift from direct engagement to ambush and coordinated assault, often involving multiple anti-tank teams. Recommendation: prioritize development of heavier anti-tank ordnance and improve infantry-tank cooperation. The field, once seemingly open for the infantry, had become a killing ground where the apex predator was now a steel beast. The engagement with Panther tanks, particularly the shock of their frontal armor and the reach of their 7.5cm KWK-42 L-70 cannon, fundamentally reshaped Soviet anti-tank doctrine. Initial reports from the front, compiled into operational summaries by Stavka, consistently highlighted the Panther's imperviousness to the 45mm and early 76mm anti-tank guns at typical engagement ranges. This necessitated a rapid re-evaluation of both infantry tactics and the development priorities for new anti-tank weapons. Damage reports from Kursk and subsequent battles provided stark evidence. Analysis of knocked-out Panthers revealed that over 70% of penetrations achieved by Soviet anti-tank guns, including the 76mm ZIS-3, occurred on the flanks or rear at ranges under 500 meters. Frontal penetrations were rare, often requiring specialized ammunition or extremely close ranges, which infantry anti-tank teams could only achieve at immense cost. This data directly informed the urgent push for heavier anti-tank artillery. The 57mm ZIS-2 anti-tank gun, previously considered too powerful and costly for mass production, was reintroduced into service in 1943, its high muzzle velocity proving more effective against Panther glacis plates. Production logs indicate a rapid ramp-up from an average of 150 units per month in early 1943 to over 600 units by late 1943. This reprioritization demonstrated a direct response to the Panther threat, recognizing the need for a dedicated, high-velocity weapon. Beyond artillery, the infantry's personal anti-tank capabilities also underwent significant revision. The PTRD and PTRS anti-tank rifles, effective against earlier German tanks, were largely obsolete against the Panther's armor. Interrogation files from captured German tankers frequently mentioned the ineffectiveness of these weapons. This spurred the development and mass production of more potent anti-tank grenades and, crucially, shaped the tactical emphasis on close-quarters combat for infantry to exploit the Panther's vulnerable sides and rear. The encounter also influenced the design philosophy of future Soviet tanks. The KV series, with its heavy but often poorly sloped armor, gave way to the IS series, which incorporated sloped armor principles similar to the Panther, but often with thicker plates. Design specifications for the IS-2 tank, issued in late 1943, explicitly called for frontal armor capable of withstanding the 7.5 centimeter KWK-42 L-70 at combat ranges. Production records for the IS-2 show an initial output of 35 units in October 1943, escalating to 100 units by December, a direct response to the need for a heavy tank capable of engaging Panthers on more equal terms. This shift marked a strategic pivot from the earlier emphasis on quantity over individual unit potency, driven by the qualitative superiority demonstrated by the Panther. The doctrine of deep battle, while still central, now incorporated a more nuanced understanding of combined arms, where specialized anti-tank assets were critical for neutralizing increasingly formidable enemy armor. The development of the 100mm D10T and 122mm D25T tank guns, which became standard armaments on later Soviet tanks, directly resulted from the lessons learned against the Panther. These weapons offered the necessary penetration at range to counter the German heavy tanks, a capability sorely lacking in earlier Soviet designs. The 122mm D25T, for instance, became the primary armament of the IS-2, its high explosive filler also proving devastating against fortifications. The infantry's role in anti-tank defense became more integrated and specialized. Training manuals from 1944 emphasized ambush tactics, the use of terrain for concealment, and coordinated attacks with artillery support. The concept of tank hunter teams became formalized, equipped with satchel charges, Molotov cocktails, and later, captured Panzerfausts, reflecting a pragmatic adaptation to the evolving threat. The enduring legacy of the Panther encounter was a permanent shift in Soviet military thought towards a more balanced approach to tank design and anti-tank warfare, acknowledging the qualitative leap in German armor. The 1945 production figures for the Su-100 self-propelled gun, armed with the 100mm D-10S, reached 2,496 units, a testament to the institutionalized recognition of the need for powerful, dedicated anti-tank platforms.